The moment I understood, my son saw me as a problem to be solved. I was standing in my own kitchen holding a casserole dish. Nobody had asked me to bring, listening to my daughter-in-law laugh at something that had nothing to do with me. It was Easter Sunday. The table I had set with my own hands 2 hours earlier had been rearranged while I wasn't looking. My place setting, the one I always used, the chair beside the window, where the afternoon light came in at just the right angle, had been quietly moved to a smaller table near the hallway. The kind of table you put children at when the dining room runs out of room. I was 67 years old. I had raised my son in this house, and apparently, there was no longer space for me at my own table. If you've ever felt like a stranger inside a life you spent decades building, I think you'll understand what I'm about to share. Please stay with me. And before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Sometimes just knowing someone else is out there makes the wait a little easier to carry. My husband Bernard passed away 2.5 years before that Easter. He went on a Wednesday morning in late November, quietly, the way he had done most things in his life. Bernard Whitmore was not a loud man. He expressed love through actions. Through the bird feeder he refilled every morning without being asked. Through the cup of coffee that always appeared on my nightstand before I woke. Through the way he held my hand during scary movies, even though he had seen them all before and knew exactly what was coming. After 41 years together, losing him felt like losing my own internal compass. I knew which direction was north, but I no longer knew why it mattered. Our son, Nathan, had always been close to his father. They shared the same quiet humor, the same patience, the same tendency to observe a room before speaking in it. When Bernard died, Nathan flew in from Charlotte, stayed for the funeral, helped me sort through paperwork, then flew home. I told myself that was enough. People grieve differently. I had read that somewhere. I believed it because I needed to. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly Nathan's wife, Serena Voss Whitmore, would begin filling the silence. Serena was pleasant in the way that certain people are pleasant. Efficiently, without warmth, the way a hotel lobby is pleasant. She remembered birthdays because she had them in her calendar. She asked how I was doing in the same tone she might use to ask about the weather. I had never fully understood what Nathan saw in her, but Bernard used to tell me that wasn't my business to understand. He was right, of course. He usually was. The first Easter after Bernard's passing, I hosted dinner at my house in Raleigh. Nathan and Serena drove up with their daughter, my granddaughter Sophie, who was 13 at the time and already possessed more emotional intelligence than both her parents combined. We got through the meal reasonably well. There were empty spaces in conversation where Bernard used to sit, but we managed. The second Easter was different. Serena decided she would host. I thought that was kind. She had a large house in Charlotte, a new kitchen she had renovated the previous fall, and a genuine enthusiasm for entertaining that I had always quietly admired even when I didn't understand her. I offered to bring my sweet potato pie. Bernard's recipe, the one that had been in his family since before I ever knew him, and she said that would be lovely. When I arrived, carrying the pie in one hand and a bag of rolls in the other, the driveway was already full of cars. Serena's parents, Margaret and Don Voss, were there. Her sister and brother-in-law. Several of their Charlotte friends I had never met. The house was beautiful, I will say that. She had decorated everything in soft yellows and whites, Easter lilies on every surface, candles lit even in the afternoon. Nobody opened the door for me. I stood on the porch for a moment, both hands full, and waited. Then I set the bag of rolls down, opened the door myself, and walked in. Nathan appeared from somewhere near the kitchen. "Mom, hey!" He kissed my cheek. "Glad you made it." Then his eyes moved past me and he was already moving away. "The Voss family's all here, it's a full house." The Voss family. Not our family, the Voss family. I smiled, because that is what I have always done, and carried my pie into the kitchen. Serena was there, with her mother, Margaret, both of them, laughing over something on Margaret's phone. They looked up when I came in. "Oh, the sweet potato pie," Serena said. She said it the way you might say, "Oh, the umbrella stand when someone brings something you have nowhere to put." She took it from me and set it on the counter, near the back, behind the store-bought desserts that were already arranged in a careful display near the center island. "It smells wonderful," Margaret said, and I believed she meant it, which made it easier. The afternoon that followed is difficult to describe precisely because nothing dramatic happened. Nobody was cruel. Nobody raised their voice. There was simply a steady accumulation of small moments, each one light as a feather, each one adding weight. I walked into the living room and conversation continued around me. I sat near the fireplace, and nobody pulled up a chair to join me. I asked Nathan about his work, and he gave me a 4-sentence answer before turning to talk to Donvos about something neither of them invited me into. At one point, I refilled my own water glass because nobody offered and I didn't want to ask. Sophie found me near the bookshelf at some point during the afternoon. She sat beside me without any prompting and showed me drawings she had been working on. Detailed, serious drawings of buildings and bridges, because Sophie had decided at age 11 that she wanted to be an architect and had been committed to that decision ever since. We talked about her drawings for nearly 20 minutes. It was the only conversation that afternoon that felt like something real. Then Serena called everyone to the table. I followed the group into the dining room. The table was set beautifully. Serena had a gift for that. I had always acknowledged it. 12 chairs around a long table, each setting carefully arranged with folded cloth napkins and small name cards. I looked for mine. It wasn't there. Not at the main table. I stood for a moment and looked more carefully, thinking I had missed it. Then Serena appeared beside me, touching my elbow lightly the way someone touches you when they're about to say something slightly uncomfortable. We got a little crowded with the extra guests, so I set up a little side table for a few people. It's cozy, actually, right by the window. She smiled. Efficient, pleasant, hotel lobby warm. Sophie's over there too, and Don's brother Harold. I looked where was pointing. A round table, barely large enough for 3 people, positioned half in the dining room and half in the adjoining sunroom. Sophie was already sitting there, looking at her phone. Harold Voss, who I had met twice in my life, sat across from her eating a roll. I thought about Bernard. I thought about what he would have done in this moment. He would have pulled up a chair to that small table, sat down beside Sophie, and made it the best seat in the room. That was the kind of man he was. I sat down. I said hello to Harold. I talked to Sophie about her bridges, but something inside me had shifted. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to find the restroom. The hallway bathroom was occupied, so I went toward the back of the house, past Nathan's home office, where the door was standing slightly open. Voices came from inside. I wasn't trying to listen. I was walking past, but the words reached me before I could move away. It's the timing. That was Nathan. We've already pushed this twice. I know, but she's not going to make it easy. Serena's voice, lower, tighter than her Easter Sunday version. She doesn't have to make it easy. She just has to sign. A pause. Raymond thinks once we have the documentation sorted, the rest moves quickly. Raymond, I didn't know a Raymond in Nathan's life. The name caught in my mind like a splinter. Serena said something I couldn't fully hear. Then Nathan, more clearly. She's not going to fight it. You know how she is. She goes along with things. I stood very still in the hallway. She just goes along with things. He was talking about me. I knew it with the same certainty I had always known things about my son. The way mothers know, without evidence, without logic, through something deeper. I walked back to the table and sat down and finished my dinner. Sophie told me about a bridge she had seen in a book, the Millau Viaduct in France, taller than the Eiffel Tower, and she described it with her hands moving and her eyes lit up, and I listened to every word. It was the only thing that kept my face composed. At the end of the evening, when people were gathering coats and saying goodbyes, I looked for my sweet potato pie to take the dish home. It was sitting near the back of the counter, most of it untouched. Not because it wasn't good, because it had been hidden behind things people could see. I carried it to my car alone. Nathan walked me out. Thanks for coming, Mom. Long drive for you. Long drive as though I were a guest. Happy Easter, Nathan. I drove home in the dark and sat in my driveway for a long time before going inside. The house felt very quiet, it always did. But that night the quiet had a different quality. The kind that comes after something clarifies inside you. I thought about the name Raymond. I thought about documentation. I thought about my son saying she just goes along with things, in a tone that was not unkind, which made it worse. I thought about Bernard, 3 days later, I called our family attorney, a woman named Patricia Caldwell, who had handled Bernard's estate and who I had known for almost 15 years. I didn't have anything specific to tell her. I just had a feeling, the kind that Bernard used to say I should always trust. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Iris," she said. "That is my name, Iris Whitmore. I want you to come in this week. There are some things I'd like to review with you." "What kinds of things?" Another pause. "Things Bernard asked me to keep ready." I sat down slowly in the chair by the kitchen window, the one I always sat in when I needed to think. Outside, the dogwood tree Bernard had planted the year we moved in was coming into its spring bloom. He had planted it for me because he knew I loved them. He planted it knowing exactly where it would be visible from this chair. "Patricia," I said carefully, "what did Bernard ask you to keep ready?" She exhaled slowly. "He came to me about 4 years before he died. He had some concerns. Not emergencies, not accusations. Just concerns. He asked me to prepare certain protections." The word protections settled in the room like something solid. "I think," Patricia said, "you should come in." I went the following Tuesday. Patricia Caldwell's office was in a low brick building downtown that smelled like old paper and coffee, which I had always found comforting. She met me at the door herself, which was unusual, and brought me directly into the conference room rather than making me wait. On the table was a manila envelope. Bernard's handwriting was on the front, large, familiar letters that made my breath catch. "For Iris. Open when the time feels right." I sat down. Patricia sat across from me and folded her hands. "He left this with me in the fall, 4 years before he died," she said. "He told me to give it to you if you ever came to me with concerns about the family." His words were, she paused, "If Iris ever comes to you uncertain about the people around her, give her this first." My hands were trembling when I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, several folded legal documents, and a small index card with a name and phone number I didn't recognize. The letter was 6 pages long. Bernard's handwriting, slight slanted, the G's with long descenders, the way he had always written since I first saw his notes in college. "My darling Iris, if you're reading this, then something has happened that I hoped wouldn't. I want you to know first that none of it is your fault. You have always loved our son completely. That is not a flaw. But love can make us patient past the point of wisdom, and I want to make sure patience doesn't cost you what I spent 40 years building for us both." I had to stop reading for a moment. Patricia quietly looked away and gave me time. I continued, "I have noticed things over the past few years that I didn't share with you because I didn't want to create pain where I wasn't certain. But I spoke to Patricia about them, and I asked her to protect certain things so that no one, not even Nathan, who I love, could make decisions about your life without your full knowledge and consent. The house is yours, Iris, only yours. I transferred it to your name alone years ago, and Patricia has the documentation. The investment accounts carry protections that require your signature with independent legal counsel present. Not just your signature witnessed by anyone. There are reasons for those requirements. Trust Patricia. Trust yourself. You are not someone who goes along with things. You never were. I fell in love with you because you always knew your own mind, even when you let other people think otherwise. All my love, always." Bernard, I sat with that letter in my hands for a long time. He knew. Not everything. How could he have known everything? But he had seen enough to worry, and rather than burden me with his worry, he had quietly built walls around me while I wasn't looking. That was so perfectly Bernard that it broke my heart open and put it back together at the same time. Patricia gave me a full hour. Then she walked me through the documents. The house, the Raleigh house, the dogwood tree, the kitchen window, the bird feeder, was in my name alone. Had been since the year Sophie was born. When Bernard had quietly restructured everything without making any announcement, the investment accounts had layers of protection built in that made unilateral transfers nearly impossible. An independent financial review was required. A waiting period was required. My signature alone wasn't enough. It required my signature alongside documentation confirming I had received independent counsel. Someone had anticipated that I might be pressured into signing things, and they had made that significantly harder. The name on the index card, the phone number, Patricia told me was a private investigator named Walter Grimes. Bernard had included it himself, along with a handwritten note she showed me. In case Iris needs eyes, I don't have any more. I called Walter Grimes from Patricia's parking lot. He answered on the second ring. He sounded like someone who had spent many years being careful with words, choosing them slowly. I told him what I knew. The Easter dinner, the hallway, the name Raymond, the word documentation. He listened without interruption. Then he said, "Mrs. Whitmore, give me 2 weeks." 14 days later I sat across from Walter Grimes in a diner near his office, and he opened a folder on the table between us. The first document was a printed email chain. Nathan's name was in the thread. So was a name I hadn't seen before. Raymond Chu, a real estate consultant in Charlotte. The conversation spanned 4 months. The subject line read, Whitmore property. Timeline. I read it slowly. The house, my house, was discussed as though it were already available. Phrases like once the transfer is complete and estimated value at current market, and we're targeting Q3 appeared in messages from Raymond Chu. Nathan's responses were shorter, more cautious but present and agreeing. Walter slid the second document forward. More emails, this time between Nathan and a woman whose name I didn't recognize, a specialist, it appeared, in elder law. The subject line of one email made my skin go cold. Capacity documentation, what's required? I set the paper down. Walter waited. What does this mean? I asked, though I already knew. It means someone was exploring what would be necessary to establish that you were not fully capable of making your own decisions. The words landed like something physical. Not because they were shocking, because they were specific. Because they told me that the Easter dinner, the small table by the window, the efficient cheerfulness, the you know how she is, she just goes along. All of it was not carelessness, it was preparation. Who is driving this? I asked. Walter folded his hands. Based on what I've gathered, Mrs. Whitmore, I want to be careful here because this is still developing. But based on the communication patterns, Serena appears to have initiated most of the contact. Nathan is involved, but the original outreach to Raymond Chu came from Serena's email address. Serena, I thought about her touching my elbow at the Easter table. We got a little crowded with the extra guests. I thought about the sweet potato pie at the back of the counter. I didn't feel angry, not yet. What I felt was something closer to grief. Because even now, even with papers spread on a diner table that told me clearly what had been happening, I could still remember Nathan at 7 years old, coming to find me in the garden, bringing me a rock he'd found, because he thought the color was interesting and wanted to show me. I could still remember the weight of his hand in mine crossing the street. Love doesn't disappear because the truth arrives. That's what makes the truth so difficult. I need to know one more thing, I said to Walter. Has anything been signed? He looked at me steadily. Not yet. That appears to be what they're working toward. Not yet. 2 words that contained everything. My phone had been ringing more frequently in the weeks since Easter. Nathan calling to check in, more than he had in the previous year combined. Serena texting cheerful messages about Sophie's school events, forwarding articles she thought I might like. I had noticed the change and told myself cautiously that it might be genuine. That grief sometimes reorganizes people. That distance sometimes corrects itself. Now I understood it differently. They were building access, rebuilding rapport, creating a context in which it would feel natural, even considerate, for them to bring me documents to review. I had almost believed it was real. I wanted to believe it. That, I think, is the most painful part of all of this. Not that people you love can choose badly, but that you spend so long hoping they haven't. The following Friday, Nathan called and asked if he could visit the following weekend. Just him, he said. A chance to catch up. He mentioned wanting to look through some of his father's things. Some old tools in the garage, some fishing equipment. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he'd been working with a financial planner and might bring along some paperwork that could be useful for my estate planning. I said that sounded fine. Then I called Patricia. She said she'd be available that Saturday morning if needed. When Nathan arrived, he came alone as promised. No, Serena. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than sleep, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something you can't put down. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had done homework for 12 years. And for a while we talked about ordinary things. His work, Sophie's latest drawings. She had shown him a design for a pedestrian bridge she'd invented herself, he said, and he was proud of her in the way parents are proud when they recognize something of themselves in their child. I watched him while he talked and thought about the boy who brought me rocks. Eventually, he reached into the bag he had brought and removed a folder. He set it on the table between us. "I've been working with someone on long-term planning," he said. His voice was careful, too careful. "Just looking at ways to simplify things as time goes on. There are some documents here that would make things easier. For you, for everyone." "What kind of documents?" It's a trust restructuring, mostly, and a limited power of attorney for some financial matters." He pushed the folder slightly toward me. "Nothing major. Patricia can look at them too if you want. As though it were optional." I looked at the folder. Then I looked at my son. "Nathan," I said. "Who is Raymond Chu?" The change in his face was immediate. Small, controlled, but immediate. Like a window that closes very quickly. "Where did you hear that name? Does it matter?" A silence stretched between us. The bird feeder outside was empty. I hadn't refilled it that week, and I made a mental note that I would, later, because Bernard would have wanted it filled. "Mom!" Nathan's voice was quieter now. Different. Some of the careful scripting had dropped away. "Things have been hard. Financially. I should have told you a long time ago." I waited. "Serena and we made some decisions a few years ago that didn't go the way we planned. There were some investments." He stopped. Started again. "We have debt, real debt. Not the kind you manage quietly." He said it the way someone says something they have rehearsed and dreaded simultaneously. "How much?" he told me. The number was significant. Significant enough to explain everything. The emails, the timeline, the real estate consultant, the capacity documentation, the systematic rebuilding of closeness since Easter. I sat with the number for a moment. Then I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at the table. "Because I didn't want you to know we'd failed. Not because I was frail. Not because I couldn't handle it. Because he was ashamed." Something in that answer made me sadder than I had been all week. Because shame is not the same as malice, even when it leads to the same place. My son had not looked at me and decided I was an obstacle. He had looked at his own failure and decided I was a solution. There was a difference. The damage was the same either way, but the difference mattered. "Nathan," I said carefully, "I love you. I want you to hear that first." He looked up. "And because I love you, I need you to understand something." I folded my hands on the table, the way Patricia had folded hers. "Your father spent years making sure that the things he built for us could not be taken from me. Not by accident, not by pressure, not by paperwork I signed without understanding what I was signing." Nathan was very still. "I know about Raymond Chu," I said. "I know about the timeline. I know about the capacity documentation." I paused. "I know most of it." The color left his face. "I'm not going to sign that folder." He didn't argue. I think he had known, somewhere underneath everything, that this conversation was coming. Maybe he had even wanted it to come. The way people sometimes arrange to be caught because they cannot find the courage to stop themselves. We sat in the kitchen for another hour. He cried at some point, which I had not seen since his father's funeral. I didn't stop him. I handed him a napkin and let him cry, the way I had done when he was small, because that instinct does not go away no matter what else changes. He told me the full extent of the debt. He told me Serena had been the one to approach Raymond Chu first, but he had not stopped her. That was his responsibility to own. And I told him so, and he agreed. He told me Serena didn't know about Bernard's protections, that she had assumed the house and accounts would be straightforward to access once the right documents were in place, that she had been wrong. I told him I was glad Bernard had been so thorough. When Nathan left that afternoon, he drove away in a car that seemed to carry less than it had arrived with. Not fixed. Nothing was fixed. But lighter, maybe. The way things get when they're finally put down. I stood on the porch and watched him go. Then I went inside and refilled the bird feeder. The months that followed were not simple. Truth rarely arrives and immediately rearranges everything into order. Nathan and Serena entered counseling, both together and individually, which I thought was wise and said so when Nathan told me. Serena called me once, in late June, And the call was one of the most uncomfortable conversations I have ever had. Not because she was unkind, but because she was honest, which is harder to respond to than unkindness. She said she had convinced herself that I would be fine, that I had more than I needed, that this was practical rather than wrong. She had said all of that to herself so many times it had started sounding true. I told her I understood the mechanism, even if I couldn't excuse the result. I did not tell her that I forgave her, because I wasn't sure yet that I did. Forgiveness is not something I have ever been able to manufacture on schedule. What I did, during those months, was live. I had not been doing that particularly well since Bernard died. I had been maintaining, keeping the house, responding to calls, attending church, showing up to things because not showing up felt like giving in. But living is different from maintaining. Living requires choosing things because you want them. I signed up for a watercolor class at the Community Arts Center, 2 blocks from my house. I had always wanted to paint and never had a reason not to that made any real sense. The instructor was a retired architect named Clifton. I mention him by his first name only because everyone called him Clifton. It was simply who he was. And he had the gift of making absolute beginners feel like they had simply not yet found their medium. I was not talented. I was present. That turned out to be enough. I met a woman in that class named Frances Mott, a retired school librarian who had the best laugh I had encountered in years. Sudden and complete, the kind of laugh that rewrites whatever room it enters. We started having lunch after class. Then we started walking on weekday mornings. Then Frances introduced me to her friend group, a loose and comfortable gathering of women in their 60s and 70s who met on the second Thursday of every month at whoever's house had the best porch. For the first time since Bernard died, I had somewhere to be that I had chosen entirely for myself. Sophie came to visit in September. She drove up from Charlotte alone. She had her license now, and Nathan had let her take the car. And we spent a Saturday looking at her bridge drawings and driving to a lake Bernard and I had loved, where she took photographs of the water for a project she was working on. On the drive back, she said, without looking at me, "I'm sorry about Easter. I didn't understand what was happening until later, but I'm sorry." I reached over and squeezed her hand on the steering wheel. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I told her. "I know, but I still am." That was the most healing thing anyone said to me all year. Not because she had done anything wrong, because she had noticed. Because she had carried it. Because some people, even at 16, understand that witnessing something matters, and that silence after the fact is its own kind of response. I thought about that for weeks. The Christmas that year I hosted at my house in Raleigh. Nathan and Serena came. Sophie came. Frances and her husband joined us for Christmas Eve dinner. It was not a perfect gathering. There were silences between Nathan and me that hadn't existed before. Silences we were both learning to navigate. Because some things change the geography of a relationship, and you have to learn the new map. Serena was careful with me in a way that was slightly exhausting, but I understood it. Trust, once dropped, doesn't simply reassemble itself. It requires patient handling. But something had shifted that Easter could not have predicted. I sat at the head of my own table. I had set every place myself, with cloth napkins and my good china. And I had made Bernard's sweet potato pie and put it at the center of the dessert display, where everyone could see it. When people complimented it, I said thank you, because it was mine, and I had made it, and I was allowed to accept the compliment without deflecting. Sophie sat beside me all evening. She showed everyone her bridge drawings on her phone, walking through the engineering logic she'd researched, explaining load distribution with the comfortable authority of someone who has been building towards something for a long time. I watched her and thought about Bernard, about the bird feeder, about the letter, about the way some people love you loudly and some people love you structurally, building things around you while you sleep, making sure the weight has somewhere to rest. I thought about the watercolor class and Frances's laugh, and the lake, and Sophie's hand on the steering wheel. I thought about the dogwood tree outside the kitchen window, the one Bernard planted so it would be visible from the chair where I think best. Here is what I know now that I did not know. The morning I drove home from Easter Sunday with an untouched pie in my car. The people who love you well are not always the ones you expected. Sometimes the love that holds you is not the love you were reaching toward. Sometimes you have to stop reaching and look at what's already there. Already built. Already rooted. Already blooming whether you noticed it or not. I was not left behind at that Easter table. I was just shown, in the clearest possible way, where I did not belong, so that I might finally, after 67 years, find exactly where I did.